Hey everyone, we're here with another special guest today, Jay Golding, who has been on a tear in Australia over the last year. Since the old world came out, vampire counts were sort of pigeonholed pretty quickly as a screams list. And if you've been following the metagame, you'd be aware of some of the sort of skew list that comes through Tomb Banshees and leadership debuffs. But Jay has done consistently very well, not only in real life here in the major tournaments in Australia, but online through the esport tournaments, which attract some of the best players in the world. He's been playing a vampire counts list at 2,000 and 2,400 points, and he's here today to sort of run down why it works and talk about his experiences playing in those types of tournaments to success. Welcome, Jay. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me on.
No worries. Did you want to just talk about what is different about what you play and why it works?
Yeah, I think the obvious point of difference, right, is a vampire count instead of going holy screams. At 2K, there's in fact only one scream in the list, but the 2.4K version of the list starts with a Master Necromancer, Mortis engine, Necromancy, level 4, all the usual. We've got a spell familiar, because we'll be using the lore familiar later. We've got a skull staff. The skull staff, if you're not familiar with it, is +1 to dispel, +3 inches dispel range. I find that just very useful, very good at shutting down opposing magic phases. When the Sisters of the Thorn were still around, it was very good at shutting down them, but it's still good. And then we have a Talisman of Protection. So if you're familiar with the Vampire Counts list, you might notice a few omissions. No Scepter of Dinaro for the double
Yep.
res, and the Talisman on the Master Necromancer. Now, that one I'll come back to later. Then we just have a singular Tomb Banshee at 2,400. Just a nice piece, very useful. Screams, Ethereal, all that. Then we come to the Vampire Count. Now, this is really the star of the list, especially at this points level, because so we're a level 2 wizard with Master of the Black Arts to get us to level 3. We have Dark Acolyte, which gives us our own raise. Very useful healing ourselves or the Master Necromancer, because whatever your wizard level, you're still just healing one wound there. And then we have Zombie Dragon, which is an Abyssal Terror at 2K. And Illusion, Great Weapon, Lore Familiar, and Crown of the Damned, which is a 4+ ward save, but makes you stupid. Obviously, what we're going for here is Spectral Doppelganger, but we can also get Glittering Robe for a -1 to hit. Very useful because your weapon skill 7. So a lot of the times, even a Chaos Lord or an Elf Prince is hitting you on 5s, and especially useful into Bretonnians, because there is no possible way they can not hit you on 5s with that, with the Exiles army, because they're a weapon skill 6. Very, very useful. Yeah, so we've just got a great weapon. So it's strength 7, AP 2, 2d6 hits from Spectral Doppelganger. You could use a magic weapon. There is some magical items allowance left over, but I find that's more than enough output to take on anything you would like to take on. And then we have a White Lord. He's got a War Banner and a great weapon. He's nice and cheap. Then I'll just quickly go through core. We got 2 units of 10 Crypt Ghouls, 2 units of 5 Dire Wolves, and 21 Grave Guard with hand weapons and shield, Drakenhof Banner, and Implacable Defense. So the Dire Wolves are basically just chaff. They're redirectors. They can go after war machines. Very useful unit. Crypt Ghouls are skirmishers. They hold flanks. They can occupy woods to make sure the Green Knight doesn't come on. That sort of thing. The Grave Guard are basically just a brick that is very hard to kill, won't give ground, and has 6 static combat res. So you can slam it into the flank of something that is, say, a dragon, and if you've got a champion there, so you can, if it fluffs its attacks, or if you've got some other way of getting more combat res, like another unit, you can just auto break them. It's very useful. We have 3 Fellbats. They're just Fellbats. They fly. They're very fast. They're good at hunting war machines and being annoying. We have 7 Blood Knights drilled. A Kastellan Standard Bearer. The Kastellan has supernatural horror, vampire power, so he causes terror. Um, that is very useful just because having a second uh, source of terror is useful, but also because they're drilled in a marching column. You can actually completely neuter drilled heavy cavalry by placing skirmishers around them, such as they can't reform. So they can declare the charge. But what the terror allows you to do is force terror tests in that situation, especially against like chaff or skirmishers that have a low leadership and might be out of range of the general. So you can get out of some sticky situations against an advanced player with that one. And then we have 3 Vargheists with a Vargoyle.
So, do you think, so you've played this really well at 2,400 in 3 major tournaments that we're aware of in Australia, and online it was 2,000 points both times, wasn't it, for Esper?
Yeah.
Yeah,
2,000 points
what do
Esper.
you see as sort of the differences for people who play only 2,000? It feels like you've played mostly the same list over the time, with some adjustments. I don't know. Did you ever have zombies in there? I don't know if you ever did.
I had zombies in Espot 1.
Okay. So that's the only thing I could remember that was a major difference. How would you say if you're shifting from 2,400 to 2,000, what did you see as like cutting out? It sounds like you've got pretty strong ideas of how to work against some of the stronger armies. But do you
Yeah,
see what I think you said Abyssal Horror at 2,000? What other adjustments do you make?
yeah. So at 2,000, I cut out the Tomb Banshee. I bring the Zombie Dragon down to an Abyssal Terror, and I take the War Banner off the White Lord and put that on the Graveguard instead, and drop the Drakenhof banner. And
Yeah.
then play around with core, drop some champions, etc., etc. But and I might drop 1 Blood Knight depending on if I want to bring the Vargheist or not.
Yeah.
Online, I might take 8, but I only own 7 Blood Knights, so that's why there's 7.
Yeah, fair enough. Unfortunately, a reality for a lot of Warhammer players. I think I worked out because I'm a Vampire Counts fan. I played them a long time ago, and I think you've done a great job with the list. And yeah, 2,000 if you want the Vargeist, I think you can only fit in 6 with
Yeah.
all the trimmings. So I guess like what has impressed me, like for people who follow along, it feels like not only like you spoke a lot just then about different meta elements, but whenever I look up tournaments and your name comes up, you seem to like smash the average player as well with this list. What do you think that comes from with this build?
I think this build is just very aggressive. It can get in your face. I will almost certainly be in combat turn 2 unless I don't want to be. That can even be in combat turn 1, depending on the deployment. If you have vanguards, or if I take if I go second. And there are just basically this list is very fast. You can set up the combats I want to take, and essentially give you the option to take those combats, or I can do something else, which I also want to do. Because of that mobility, because the Blood Knights can march 24 inches if they're within range of the Master Necromancer. And the slowest unit is the Graveguard, who are effectively movement 5 with reserve move probably, which is like that's elf infantry. Um, and everything else either flies or moves very, very fast.
Mm. Do you think so? Fell bats aren't everywhere, but they're pretty good in terms of efficiency of points. The Crypt Ghouls weren't everywhere, but again, you look up the stat line, you think, oh, that's pretty good for the points. Direwolves are pretty standard, like as almost as I think, are they probably just as good as Chaos Warhounds? Probably better, given that they're in an undead
Chaos
army.
Warhounds are a little better, but they're undead, so
Mm. So, you have all these versatile units, and it feels like they're just average to above average in all of these categories. So when you say sit down across from someone who might have their own dragon or some yeah, like that, for example. Like that's probably the bog standard. Like imagine you sit down from a high elf player, they've got a ward save dragon. It's not what we consider like top of the meta at the moment, but or a chaos lord dragon, which I guess could be. How would you handle something like that?
so my sort of instinctive game plan is I want to separate their magic defense from their dragon or other very
Okay.
big expensive unit that I want the vampire to kill. So I'll use dire wolves, I'll use fellbats to if I see a chance to just YOLO them in and give me an unobstructed turn of combat, I'll take it. But otherwise, I want to use my own magic, my Blood Knights, my Vargeists, my fast-moving units to separate the dragon and their magic defense, and ideally kill the mage, but to get them away from defending the dragon, and then I'll send the vampire count in.
Mm-hmm.
There might be times I'd send them in even with magic defense if I've got glittering robe off. For example, I feel pretty safe about going in. Or if their magic defense is only like a level 4, they don't have a puppet or the wood elf stave or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'll just go right in. But generally, what I want to do is create the combat I want. Through the Master Necromancer is especially good at that because obviously you got the debuff spells from Necromancy, but Unquiet Spirits I think is underappreciated. The 3d6 strength 2 no armor save magic missile.
Yeah.
That's really good at killing mage bodyguards, I found. You can use that. You can also use leadership debuffs. And the other way I would deal with a dragon, if they're just too nasty, if they've got a lot of Monster Slayer or something like that I don't want to deal with, what I want to do is I want to get them to charge the Blood Knights and then slam the Graveguard in the flank and just win through combat res forever. Because that is, I issue a challenge. No matter how many wounds you do, no matter how good you are in combat, you lose that combat. And you'll keep losing that combat until I run out of Blood Knights, which means I'll have to probably fail to res them several times, which is unlikely with the BSB reroll and with 2 chances for resing, with the vampire as well. But yeah, and even on their own, the Blood Knights will hold a dragon for a few turns, generally enough time for me to get the Graveguard or the vampire count in.
Yeah.
Because they're not very good into dragons offensively because they have to accept challenges. But defensively, because they can all issue and accept challenges, they're great at delaying a dragon. You can also put the Master Necromancer behind them, behind the champion, so that they cannot give ground. And you'll lock the dragon in place. You'll scream it to death, or you scream at it, and you can either send the vampire count in when it's on a few wounds, or you send the Graveguard in if you can maneuver them to get in.
Do you think with the changes to Lore Familiar not being able to take the signature that will hurt this plan? Like if you want Doppelganger and Glittering Robe?
Not at all, because you can still take the lore signature. Right, like the
Can you?
illusion signature. Yeah, you
Okay.
can still take the.
It's
What you
just
can't take
okay.
is the racial signature. Like
Yeah. Maybe I got to read that in more detail. So that's good. So because that was one of the sort of tidbits I was hoping to understand whether do you always take Glittering Robe, or I guess at casting level 2, you have Miasmic Mirage, which is very powerful but situational and expensive. And Crystal Column, or you just always full ball combat, the ability to go 2d6 strength 7 hits, not even attacks, plus not really get taken in response is just too good to ignore.
Yeah, so with the Master of the Black Arts, the vampire count is level 3, and the +1 from the Master Necromancer means you're casting at level 4. So you get 3 spells. I generally choose Glittering Robe and Spectral Doppelganger. Occasionally, I'd work out the maths on if Van Hels was better before the FAQ, but generally Glittering Robe is almost always better.
Okay. So what would you say? Sorry,
I was just going to say, generally I choose between Mirage and Column, depending on if it's a gun line or it's got more combat targets. That's basically my criteria.
Yeah. So what would you say, like if I just pop off the top of my head, like you were playing Bretonia, could you give us a 30-second sort of or less, what are you worried about and where do you think you've got advantages?
Right, what I'm worried about is that the Peg Knights are way more maneuverable than me, so it's hard to outmaneuver them. So I need to make sure that they can't get to the Master Necromancer and that they aren't cleaning everything else up. And ideally, I want to bait them into the Vampire, but if they're smart, they probably won't take that fight. So I want to create opportunities where they can maybe go into some Ghouls gutting the Master Necromancer, and then the Vampire can come into them, or if they can go into Blood Knights and the Vampire can come into them, etc. I want to create opportunities to get them stuck in pin down, and then I can kill them. Essentially.
Yep, sounds good. You had, I guess, very unlucky not to beat Daenerys in Espot, who was running the Royal Guard list. I'm not sure if you've had any experience against other types of poison blocks, but if you came up against an army like that, could you give us sort of a 30-second or less rundown of what you might be trying to do?
Yeah, so what I want to do is I want to use my fast-moving units to deny TMP. Use Ghouls, Fellbats, Direwolves, even Blood Knights to just make sure they can't get TMP. Then I want to use Crystal Column to hide the Vampire count, and the Necromancer ideally. And then ideally I don't want to take more than one volley. But if I only take a few wounds and I can heal them back up, it's not a big deal if I take two. I want to get in without stand and shoot, which probably means getting the Blood Knights in for a turn and then getting the Vampire in. That was how I got into Daenerys. Or even just like get Direwolves in, right? Just make sure that they aren't shooting, they're going in the direction I want. Or just put all the leadership debuffs on them and try hope for terror. If you think you're not gonna like against the Orc and Goblin ones, if you think you're not gonna get another way, you can always try that. You can chuck the Blood Knights in.
Would you say there's
terror.
anything else out there that you're worried about, to the point that you just hope you don't get drawn against it? Like there are the various types of undead, Tomb Kings builds, screams.
Scream lists.
Yeah.
I can beat screams, but I think generally screams. I'm pretty hopeful into an equal skill match. I think I've got a good chance there against almost any type of list. But screams, I think my opponent needs to make a mistake for me not to just go for a draw. Now, if I go against screams, I'll just go for a draw unless I think they'll make a mistake, in which case I'll try and bait it out and then try and assassinate the general.
Yep.
Or if they have Blood Knights or something like a Terrorgeist, I'll try and bait that out on its own, kill them, then run away.
Okay. So you'd be looking at a minor victory against screams because otherwise you've been able to pull off a lot like big wins against most lists.
Yeah, against screams, it's probably a minor victory if they're a good player. I mean, if they're not a great player, you can just kill the general and then kill the other Necromancer and everything will crumble to death. You probably get a 20-0. But outside of that specific scenario, I think you're looking for a minor victory against screams. They're very good at points denial.
Yeah. So look, I guess for people who are watching, I hope, Jay, if you don't mind, if you can give us an updated list and we'll put it in the show notes. But this is sort of a twofold interview. So Jay's run through that archetype for you, but definitely worth mentioning, very strong run of success over tournaments. And we've talked about doing well. So Espot 1 did pretty well. Was it 4-1 at Espot 1?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And then Espot 2 made it to the last round, losing to the previous champion and someone who's well known and playing that sort of list that was somewhat not known outside of Espot before then. Then in real life, where I guess things are starting to evolve in the old world, but the big tournaments in Sydney have historically been Moab, CanCon in Canberra, and then I think I don't know if Axemaster fit in as somewhat of a practice for CanCon, but an event with over 16 players, I think 2,400 points. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like being someone who plays competitively and those tournaments, what do you do to sort of prepare for that? What do you do on the day that you think has led to some of the success? And even if you want to come back and forth between 2-day tournaments are grueling enough, but playing online potentially up to 6 hours is also grueling. How do you think you've been able to do well in those environments when other people like me get crushed mentally over a short period of time?
Yeah. So I think the obvious ones apply, right? Get enough sleep, drink enough water. Especially like a big convention like CanCon, it'll be very loud. It was held in the height of the Australian summer, so it'll be very warm. Like you think about these things, but you don't think about that you will actually be quite tired. I mean, you're just pushing models around on a table, you're standing on your feet most of the time. Your feet will hurt, it'll be warm. If you can just keep your head, that helps you enormously, right? But also, just develop good mnemonics so you don't forget stuff, right? So what I did when I started playing is I had the rulebook open with the turn sections, like each subphase. I would go through each on the rulebook, reading what I could do in this turn in this subphase. I go into the next, read what I could do. I also find it helps me to narrate what I'm doing. Like I'll say, command subphase, I don't have anything to do because nothing's dead. You have to test the vampire's stupidity,
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? Because that just helps me not forget. And if you that can really screw you if you forget your own abilities, right? Because your opponent's not under any obligation to let you do it. I generally try to let my opponent do something if it's not super far back, just because that's not how I want to win, right? I want to win against their army and their generalship, not their memory after 5 hours of playing Warhammer in a cramped, loud room. But you can't rely on that. Also, obviously, in Axemaster and CanCon, they were both 20-0 system events, not win-loss draw. So if you're up against an average player, go for the 20-0. Because, those are points you're leaving on the table if you're not getting them. So you got to go fast, you got to go hard, you got to take out as many points as possible, as quickly as possible, and hopefully table them. Because that gives you a buffer when you're playing against much better lists and better players to go for a small win or a small loss rather than having to go 20-0 in the final round, right?
Yeah.
That's the hardest place to go 20-0.
It's a good way of putting it because like to some extent you're playing the game of the tournament itself, and depending on who you are, like you feel some people feel prickly about it, other people don't. Like some people are there to throw dice, other people are there to do well. And on this channel, we're sort of hedging it both ways at this point, that we like to play casually and roll a lot of dice, get into a lot of combats, but also we like to play well at tournaments, and that involves like a level of procedural, like mnemonics. That's the first time I've heard anyone say mnemonics, and especially narrating them to yourself is good. As someone who's a teacher, that's a great way of retaining that information, I think. So would you say that like CanCon obviously has its own weather, as you said? Yeah, you have to have experienced it. I've been gaming for a long time, and there's just nothing like it is literally the hottest time of year that they do it in a big shed. But would you say this time around that was something people felt? They changed the format a little bit. It was over 3 days. Was that easier or harder
Yeah,
than in the
I
past?
think well, in CanCon I was finishing every game at least an hour early. Um,
Yeah.
Even the ones that went to turn 6. But I think a lot of people needed 3 hours. I think 3 hours also allowed people to take it a bit more slowly, take breaks if they needed to. I think given the heat and the noise, having time to confirm things was probably a good idea.
Mm.
Right. There is just a point I want to add about how I often win big over average players. I think that the number one thing in terms of actually playing the game that separates someone who can reliably win versus the average player and someone who wins 75% of the time versus the average player is precision, right? Whenever you move a unit, you should be thinking about what can happen to that unit there, and you can measure that, right? Because you're allowed to pre-measure. So measure charge ranges, measure spell ranges. For example, Miasmic Mirage. It's a 15-inch range. The units that you want a Miasmic Mirage can almost certainly charge further than 15 inches. So arcs as well. Often on like the Tomb King Mortuary Cult, they'll have the dragon on illusion. So you can stay out of that arc and you won't get hexed, right? Um, but I think that's the gameplay difference I often see.
Mm. Do you think so were you playing before pre-measuring at all, or when did you start playing Warhammer
Uh,
Fantasy, so to
so
speak?
I played a little bit of seventh and eighth as a kid, but I didn't really understand the rules. Didn't know how to paint models, right? So
Yeah.
I wouldn't really call that experience. I basically started with Old World in
Yeah,
terms
really?
of playing the game. and certainly playing competitively.
Okay. What brought you to Old World was it because you'd played fantasy before or had you played other games in between?
Yeah, I hadn't really played like a tabletop war game uh, sort of at all seriously before, but I heard fantasy was coming back. I was like, well, that'll be fun to get into. Maybe I'd see if I like painting, and I did like painting.
Yeah.
And then I'll see if I like playing. I do like the playing. I started off with like a tournament with like a small tournament with some friends online, and I was how should I say, probably too competitive for that environment. So like, all right, I'll find a more competitive environment.
That's good.
Um, I wouldn't even say more competitive. I just got the game a lot quicker, and I just won all the
I
time.
think it's a problem in Old World that people have to be conscious of. I think a lot of strong players are aware on one side that the, I guess, the market for the game, the way the rules are written by Games Workshop and the history of the game, that it's hasn't really been built for tournaments. However, at the other
Yeah,
end, it's also like when you go to an event, it's hard to put together an event that isn't a tournament. Because that's something we're sort of looking at right now. And there has to be something at stake. Otherwise, people just don't pay their money to show up. So you see a lot of players these days who've had success, I think, are quite deferential to, like, talking their opponents through sort of non-counterintuitive rules, interactions, or things like that. And I think that's great that Old World does that. But at the same time, I hope from the other end too, like sometimes you just outgrow a group and it's not such a bad thing to want to be good at something and to play well if you do it in the, fairly and in openly with the other players.
yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's absolutely true. If you are just too good to play at like your mate's basement, maybe just bring a really bad list or whatever if you just
Mm.
want to hang out with them. But go look up a tournament. Look up. You don't. It doesn't even need to be like a super huge one. Like in Victoria where I live, there haven't been any 2 days yet, right? But
Mm.
there or one day, and that'll even at a 1 day event, right? They'll give you competitive games, and you're able to see if you like it or not. And you know, you can always look online if uh, tournaments like the S-Bot, and that will really tell you whether you like competitive old world or not.
It sure will. And I think that's where I sort of want to take this to a conclusion. Like, it is a remarkable run of success, and I hope you're proud of yourself that, like, Patty and I on this channel are sort of online a lot, and we play as much as we can, but we're older with families, and that's those days for me are gone, being able to go to 2 days or even play online. But it is quite a cutthroat environment, and you learn a lot about how to play well. And you've done well there. Do you think that as this goes on, you got a very good claim to say right now you're the best in Australia? Would you be interested in coming to something like the Masters event if it's run particularly by the group sort of spearheaded by Old World Fanatics and they're trying to sort of push that further out? But is that something you'd be interested in playing in?
Yeah, I definitely got a Masters. I think that'd be however many games it is. I think I'd enjoy all those games. I tend to enjoy sort of very tight, very
Yeah.
competitive games against the best players. That's where I enjoy Old World the most. Um, you know, uh, so that sounds like a great time, as long as it's not held in WA.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do. I think they just want to push it for now. That I don't know if it's been an incentive for you, but we're finding locally that more players are interested. And there was some talk at CanCon that people were intentionally drawing games to keep those rankings, which to me, because I've got a lot of experience playing and running in those events or those types of events in different systems, look, if you earn the right to do that and both players agree with that, then I don't see the problem. If you're in the bottom table, you're just gonna have to play it out. If you draw someone who wants to play, it's always been that way. So, did you find, particularly this time around, where there was probably more players who've been playing Old World for the year, and you being at those top tables, that there was more conversation around that type of thing and sort of ranking, or was it just, are we sort of just pretending that this is a real thing?
Yeah, I heard some conversation about you know, well, always in a tournament, if you've got an unwinnable game, you just go for the draw, right? Um, I didn't really hear any conversation about like specifically about certain games for ranking.
Hmm.
I did hear a lot of conversation about what is because at CanCon I was so far ahead of everyone else, right? That
Hmm.
after game four, I think I just started thinking it through. Like, even if I lose badly, I can still win
Hmm.
if I win the last game. I did lose the fifth game, like 14-6,
Yeah.
and then won the last game 20-0. But I only need to win that. In fact, I think I ended up only needing to lose that at like a 4-16 to win.
Yeah.
Which is why you go for the 20-0s early, as I said before.
Yeah, it felt like you're a long way in front. And those tracking those lists, it does seem like something that CanCon draws a lot of Victorian players. Interestingly, a lot of the New South Wales players didn't go, even though it's only sort of 2.5 hours for many of us to travel. And I think there'll be more movement to try to get these events. I hope in Victoria they're able to pull together a 2-dayer. I know in Sydney, at least in Western Sydney, there's starting to be rumours of maybe that happening somewhere in the middle of the year, but that's not firming up yet. I'm sure there'll be plenty of notice if it's established. But I'd go for it, Jay. At this stage, you'd be the favorite. I hope people are starting to realize that. Maybe you can dole out a few autographs here or there now, but I appreciate you coming on. I think the list has legs. I certainly want to build a vampire army, and it'll probably be based strongly on what you've been able to do. So, congratulations.
All right, thank you very much for having me on, and
All right, so
good luck with your
thanks.
vampires.
Yeah, good luck. Continue to do well. We'll speak to you soon.
All right.
Bye.